This is an example of a valuable that was in circulation in the Western Pacific, probably earlier this century. And there's a story about it which has to do with the character of money and whether or not this kind of valuable can be counted as money. Malinowski is famous for having discovered the existence of a trade between Melanesian islands that was facilitated by exchange of these valuables, but he was very certain that these valuables were not money because he identified money with the impersonal objects that are produced by Western mints and which are circulated within a framework of market competition and individual self-interest. And he wanted to argue that the ethos of exchange that surrounded these objects was one of generosity, and that meant that they were personal instruments of political exchange, but not money. But Marcel Mauss, the French polymath, if you like, disputed this point. So let's go back to what money is. I mean, money tends to be impersonal because it needs to link people who don't know each other, and it has to retain its value independent of their personal relationships. Indeed, we tend to think of money as being anonymous and impersonal and in some sense anti-human. It dehumanizes us in some way. Marcel Mauss was quite clear that money served a particular purpose. He said, we live in societies that aspire to being self-sufficient, and we develop our systems of rights and obligations based on membership of these local societies. But no society is ever self-sufficient, least of all these Melanesian islands that had very uneven distribution of the resources that were necessary to sustain the civilization. So societies are always drawn into exchange relations with strangers in order to meet the deficiencies of local supply. And for that reason, he thought that money was universal, that money, indeed markets, were universal because they provided the means of local societies to exchange, to extend their relationships, to engage with foreigners who were not part of their society. But the point that he made was that the form in which we experience money is not the only way that it appears, and that these cooler valuables can be understood as showing that money and markets can also be highly personalized. And that was his general point. But then, since then, in anthropology, there has been an argument about what these objects of gift exchange do. And in fact, in recent decades, we've come to think of gift exchange as being a type of economic arrangement that contrasts with market economies, capitalist economies. And to a certain extent, this also stands for the gap between us who have these market capitalist economies and them who have their own primitive and peculiar ways of circulating objects. And Marcel Mauss has often been cited as the source for this point of view, but actually he wrote his famous essay on the gift to refute it. He thought that markets were not just self-interested, impersonal systems of exchange, but they always had a large amount of hidden social and cultural support. For him, the interest of these cooler exchange relations was not that they represented an alternative to market economies, but that they represented a variety of the same kind of exchange relations that includes markets as well as this. And his basic point, and one that I have tended to make, is that money and markets are always both personal and impersonal. This idea about the contrast between gifts and markets is commonly derived from a book by Chris Gregory called Gifts and Commodities. Chris was a Marxist economist at the time, working in Papua New Guinea. And what struck him was that traditional means of exchange such as this were easily combined with modern exchange instruments. people were walking around carrying this kind of shell around their neck and stuffing banknotes up their noses. So what interested him originally was, how is it that things that we consider to be, or many people consider to be, fundamental category opposites could be combined so readily in Papua New Guinea? And this banknote is, in some sense, a proof of this point of view, which is that the name for the currency is Kina, which is derived from these traditional ornaments, and yet it is a national currency of the conventional kind. And that's what I take from the juxtaposition of this rather beautiful object and this, the note.